Welcome to Satsang.
Hello, Vishrant. Can you please talk about the topic suffering and addiction?
Okay. All human beings have an addictive nature. It's just part of being human. We get addicted to that changes our consciousness or makes us feel better or takes us away from discomfort. We get addicted to just about anything from drugs to alcohol to food to working to gaming to gambling to our mobile phones, to social media, you name it. Anything that can change our consciousness has the potential for us to become addicted to it. And in itself, it usually is an avoidance of something. It makes us feel comfortable. It takes us away from something that's not comfortable. So after work, people have a drink. To take the edge off, they say. Well, really, they're just trying to change their consciousness. They're medicating themselves. And the same goes with drugs, medicating themselves. Some people medicate themselves with food. Some people medicate themselves by becoming doaholics. And that's a pretty good one. They don't usually see that as an addiction, but they get addicted to constantly doing because it looks productive and it takes them away from feeling something they don't want to. And so a lot of our addictions are just escape mechanisms or medication to medicate us away from something we don't want to feel, possibly towards something we do want to feel. The problem with that is if you're into higher consciousness, you've got to stop running away. You've got to stop avoiding. You've got to allow yourself to be with what is. Because as long as you're avoiding, as long as you're medicating yourself in some way, you're probably keeping yourself in lower consciousness. It's in stillness and silence that we see the mechanisms of what's happening around us and what's happening in our minds. As long as we're using escape methodologies, we're likely to miss what's happening, particularly if they're drugs and alcohol, because they don't raise our consciousness levels, they lower our consciousness levels. Though talking about this particular subject will probably upset a few people because people like their medication. They like their escape mechanisms. They think, oh, it makes me feel comfortable. Well, sure, it actually does. But if you're into higher consciousness, it's in the way. It's another obstacle. It's another obstacle that keeps you locked in lower consciousness. And so, to avoid suffering, people medicate themselves. But there's another way to avoid suffering. Stop resisting life. That works. Stop contracting against life. Stop resisting. Learn to become accepting of life as it is. In that acceptance, life becomes quite lovely. In our non-acceptance of life, well, it's pretty awful. And hence our need, or our perceived need, to medicate ourselves with something that's probably addictive. If you want to heal the wounds of your heart, you have to stop running away. You have to be willing to feel what's there. If you're interested in raising your consciousness levels, you've got to stop running away. You've got to learn how to rest and be relaxed without taking something that's going to change your consciousness levels. If you want to become enlightened, you have to surrender unconditionally. And there's no running away in that. But it's always up to you. You're, you're the one that creating your reality. No one else is doing it to you. What do you really want? And what are you willing to pay for it? Addictions tend to be damaging eventually. They tend to ruin relationships and ruin jobs and ruin families, ruin lives, ruin your health. Because as the addiction goes on, we need more and more and more of whatever it is to make us feel better or to take us away from whatever we're avoiding. It's good to sit down and actually have a good look at what you're actually doing. Are you running away? Are you avoiding? What are you actually up to with whatever you're using to change your consciousness levels? Whatever addiction you're playing with to avoid your pain. Have a look. It's up to you. This is your life. Are there any questions, any statements, or any challenges to this teaching today?
The first question is as follows. I've noticed I'm addicted to dream. I constantly fall into dreaming of a perfect future.
Aha.
Why is this so addictive?
Because it takes you away from the imperfect now. Because you're not seeing life as perfect as it is, so you're looking for something better later. You've got a hope that things are going to be better later. And of course, the other side of that particular coin is the fear that they're not. And so hope always comes with fear. But both of them are projections to the future. They're not real. Now is real. Our projections to the future aren't. But those projections have the potential to take us away from feeling what's here now, which may be anything. Could be despair, it could be pain, could be anything. And so some people sell hope, the hope of later. It's an opiate that takes you away from what's here now. And it's not real. There's nothing real about the future. There's only now is real, only now. And so avoid hope. Avoid hope. Be here now. Be with what is now. Be accepting of what's here now and be free. Or you're going to start living in a projection of the future, which hope is, and it's not real. You're not even living in reality anymore. You're living in la la land in your head, in a projection. Have a look and see.
The next question. Spiritual practices like meditation and self-inquiry also have the potential of changing our consciousness. So, can these practices also become addictions?
Hopefully. So, look, anything that we practice long enough can become a default pattern. You call it an addiction. I don't think so. It's just a default pattern. Addictions tend to be more things that have the ability to help us escape from something, help us escape from pain, help us escape from suffering. At some point, with certain addictions like alcohol and drugs, it's not even escaping from pain. It's just trying to be ordinary. It's just trying to be normal, because you now got a dependence on alcohol or drugs, and if you don't get it, it hurts. And so, and so you're just topping up to make yourself feel okay. As far as self-inquiry, meditation, they're just patterns. And if you have a pattern of being mindful and develop that as a default pattern, well, you don't need to even practice it anymore. You just are present to what's real. The same as openness. If you practice openness long enough, undefendedness long enough, you develop a pattern of walking through the world undefended, open, vulnerable. And you're not doing anything to be like that. It's just what you've developed. The same as most people have developed defense systems that they walk through the world with. And so most people have a fair bit of closure to protect themselves from feeling this or that, whatever comes along or came along in their childhood or their youth that they didn't like. They developed a defense system against it. And that defense system followed them into adult years, and it'll follow them to their death unless they take it down. But really, openness is brilliant. Being vulnerable in the world is brilliant because it allows you to perceive heart. It allows you to perceive love. And so developing a pattern of openness through practice, you could become addicted to love. What an awful thing to become addicted to. Addicted to love. Love is here. It's beautiful. But not that many perceive it all the time because they're too closed. The more closed you are, the more defenses you have, the less you perceive the beauty of love. And so taking those defenses down, opening up, is very beautiful. It's a beautiful way to live on this planet, the way of the heart. But trying to tie that into the idea of addictions, I don't think so.
What does the practice of openness feel like when you're active in the world and things aren't going your way?
Look, if you're vulnerable in the world, you're vulnerable in the world. Things are going to touch you. That's just how it is. The reason people don't allow themselves to be vulnerable in the world is they don't want to be touched. They don't want to be hurt. But here's the price for heart. Here's the price for love. It's called openness. As long as we're defended, we have a shield in front of us. We keep ourselves separate from the perception of love. Openness counts for everything. And yes, if you walk through this world vulnerable and open, you're going to get hurt. You're going to get touched. That's just how it is. And if you walk through this world closed and defended, you'll probably still get touched, but not as much. But if you're interested in the way of the heart, take down your defenses. Walk through the world vulnerable and open. This is the beauty way. This is lovely. Just takes a little courage, that's all.
Would you say that suffering, like addiction, is also a part of the human condition of having a body and mind?
Would I say that suffering is like addiction is also part of the human condition of having a mind body? Uh, Both addictions and suffering is something that we do. We suffer because we offer resistance to pain. We're offering the resistance, so we're creating the suffering. Pain is just pain, and resistance is suffering. Addiction is something else we do. We get addicted to something that changes our consciousness somehow. But once again, it's our doing. We're involved with it. And so when you say it's the human condition, only if you're doing it, only if you're putting the effort into making addiction happen or putting the effort into resisting life and creating suffering, you're doing that. And as human beings, we don't need to do that. We do not need to resist life. We can accept life. We do not need to get into addictions. We can actually face the music and be with what is. We don't have to change our consciousness levels or change our consciousness to shift away from pain or whatever it is through addiction. We don't have to do that. It's a choice. And so when you say it's the human condition, I don't think so. It's a choice.
Can you talk about the moment you realized that you were the only one that causes your suffering?
Yeah, I was quite young. I was 19 years old, and I attended a seminar which turned out to be an encounter group called the Greatness in You seminar, run by an organization called Focal Universal. And part of this seminar was a book called The Handbook to Higher Consciousness by Ken Keyes. And Ken Keyes, who was a paraplegic, had written a book about higher consciousness. And in it, he had talked about how we create suffering through our victim orientated thinking. How, when we turn ourselves into victims of life through blame, we create suffering for ourselves. And I found it absolutely fascinating that we did that we actually had a choice. And I looked around and I looked at all my friends and I looked at myself and I saw, yes, I supported victim orientated thinking in myself. And I had a choice. I didn't have to. I did not have to be a victim of life. Bad things might happen. Things may do, people may do things to you you don't like, but you don't have to be a victim of them. You don't have to go to blame. You do not have to create suffering just because things don't go your way. We have a choice. We can put our hands up and be a victim, or we can see this is just life as it is. It's a choice. And so at the age of 19, I started to see that we had a fair bit of control over how much we suffered or didn't suffer, simply in relationship to how we blame or don't blame life as it is. A choice to not be a victim. And I think that was one of the greatest things I ever learned in this life, in a way. Not to be a victim of people, of situations, of myself, or of anything. To remove that blame and just see life as it is. This is what is. That's a pretty good thing to see. I'm very grateful to Ken Keyes.
If we suffer at our own hand, why is it so hard to stop suffering?
Most people don't realize they're doing it to themselves. They're not conscious enough to realize. Uh, this is the thing about lower consciousness and higher consciousness. In higher consciousness, we can see what we're doing. It's very clear to us what we're doing. In lower consciousness, we're all running unconsciously and on automatic. We don't see what we're doing. We don't see what we're up to. In lower consciousness, we don't see that we're creating our own suffering. We tend to blame situations, other people, the world, ourselves for it. We don't see that blame itself, that resistance we're offering to what is creating our own suffering because we're locked in lower consciousness. It's only when our consciousness levels start rising that we see that we are totally responsible, that we make ourselves feel, and nobody else can make us feel. We make ourselves feel. No matter what goes wrong or right, we are the ones making ourselves feel. And because of that, we can take full responsibility, stop blaming the situation or other people or whatever, and be okay with what is. This is a wonderful understanding. This is a wonderful insight, particularly if you operate on it. To not be a victim of life ever is brilliant. To not suffer through the resistance you offer is brilliant. Just realize that you're creating your reality by the way you think.
The following question is from a viewer. When I feel a sneeze coming, I feel I resist it and breathe in for the purpose of expelling it. Maybe the sneeze itself is created from resistance?
I don't know. Have a look for yourself. This is the thing. It's like people ask me these questions, and it's like, no, you find out for yourself. Anything I give you is going to be secondhand knowledge and is worthless. It's only your own direct experience and your own direct knowing that is worth anything. Borrowed knowledge is useless. Find out for yourself. If all you do is collect borrowed knowledge, you'll be into believing things. And the moment you start believing things, you're lost because you're caught in possible lies. You're caught in possible tragedies that aren't real. Belief systems, from my perspective, are all prisons. Examine them all. Find out what's real and what's not real in your experience. And everything else can go in the maybe column. Be free. I love Buddhism because it doesn't offer belief systems. It just offers a way of life. It offers a way of living that is beautiful towards higher consciousness and enlightenment. There's no belief systems. All belief systems are traps. Undo them all. Look for yourself. Find out for yourself. Investigate for yourself. Be a seeker.
Does suffering occur because of selfishness?
Suffering occurs as a result of resistance. If you don't resist life, you may experience pain, but suffering comes as a result of resistance. Stop resisting and you will stop suffering. It doesn't necessarily mean that you won't experience pain, but once again, pain is not suffering. Resistance to pain is suffering. And you're the one responsible for that resistance or that non-resistance. It's up to you.
So, are you saying it is possible to live a life of no suffering while we're living as an ego?
I'm saying there's a possibility of living a life with a lot less suffering. You see, the problem with being an ego is this: the ego is constantly, in a way, desiring things to be different. It doesn't like change much. It likes to keep things stable. And so it gets caught in desires. And if these desires become addictive demands, then there's incredible suffering. The more we resist life, the more we suffer. And so if we have desires, that is a form of suffering, even if it's a slight desire, because it's dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction is not happiness, it's suffering. The other thing that causes suffering is our attachments to everything that we think we own or we think we love, and we get fearful of losing. This causes suffering also. And so suffering happens to the ego because of its nature to constantly look for change or desire things to be different. It suffers as a result of its resistance to letting go of things it thinks it owns or loves. It suffers. But one of the main ways it suffers is turning itself into a victim of life and blaming other people, blaming situations, or blaming itself for negativities, for things going wrong. Why don't you remove that bit of suffering and look at your desires instead of having them as addictive demands? I must have this, I must do that, that must happen this way. How about treating them as preferences? And you'll find that a lot of the suffering just disappears because the level of resistance isn't there. But the only true way to get out of suffering is to wake up, to go beyond the mind and know yourself as truth. Then the mind just shuts up. And so if you ultimately want to get away from the world of suffering, the world of samsara, life, death, rebirth, life, death, wake up. Find that that's aware of your mind. Put every endeavor into finding that. Turn awareness back to itself. That's best.
The next question is from Terry on Facebook. Do you mean physical or mental pain?
Okay, both physical and mental pain can be experienced with or without resistance. Mental pain tends to be resistance if you have a look at it, but not necessarily. So you have a look at pain. You can have pain and then watch what happens. If you're not in resistance to it, you're not actually suffering. The moment you move to resistance in any way, shape, or form, you've begun the suffering. And the more resistance you put towards that pain, the more intense the suffering is. And so, in that way, we actually have or can have control over how much suffering we have. Because if we're not willing to put in the resistance, if we're willing to accept it as it is, there's a hell of a lot less suffering.
What is the difference between having a preference and an addictive demand? Is it just a shift of attitude?
It is a shift of attitude, but it's also an energy phenomenon. When we addictively demand, we're using a fair bit of force. When we're just having a preference, the force is minimal. And so the level of force we put into our desires pretty much dictates how much we suffer or not.
Does an understanding of karma help us to overcome some of our suffering?
Yes, it does. If we truly understand karma, we know that everything that we've put in, we're getting back. So when good things happen, that's just karma. When bad things happen, that's just karma. It's just payback time. And as a mature adult, you start to become willing to pay your debts. And so when negative things happen, it's just a debt being paid back. And that's okay. And so the understanding of karma is really good if you're interested in not being a victim of life. Because if you understand it as all karma, there's no victims. There's just energy at play, balancing out. You put in good, you get good back. You put in bad, you get bad back. That's just how it is. So the understanding of karma is brilliant.
The next question has been written by Savvy. How to overcome my attachment to my child? It is not causing suffering to me, but is in the path of taking a leap to finding truth.
Any any attachment that we have to anything is a problem because it keeps us stuck in lower consciousness. Any attachment. And this is just how it is. And so let go, let go, let go. But we're letting go of attachment. We're not abandoning the object. We're letting go of our attachment to the object. And so I had 3 children. And before awakening, I was very attached to them. Uh, I loved them to bits and I was attached to them. And I found that on approaching higher consciousness, on approaching awakening, that attachment was actually in the way. And so I let go. I let go of that attachment completely. But I didn't move away from my children. I just dropped the attachment to them. There's a difference. I didn't stop being their dad. I just dropped the attachment to them. And so that worked. Now, if they had have gone away, if they had have been taken away, because the attachment was already dropped, that would have been okay. It wouldn't have been my preference, but it would have been okay. And actually, that's what did happen. They did get taken away for a certain period of time because the partner I was with didn't handle what had happened to me. But it was okay because the attachment was already gone. And when they came back again, that was okay too. Let go is brilliant. It's freeing. Attachment to anything causes suffering. Just because you let go of something doesn't necessarily need you to move away from it. Have another look. Savvy?
From hearing your story, I've heard you say that you lost everything but did not suffer. Do you need to wake up to be able to achieve that?
Not necessarily. All you need to do is not resist change. Uh, so I did lose everything. Everything that I valued left. But I'd already let go of everything. I wasn't attached to anything, so it was all okay. There was no resistance to the change. There was no resistance to the loss. And so there was no suffering. That's true. The more resistance you put in, the more you suffer. And quite often, from my observation, the more resistance you put in, the more you suffer, and it doesn't change anything. You just suffer. Let go is hard for human beings because it is the human nature to get attached to things. But it's possible because we're intelligent. We can let things go. We can just see life as it is rather than addictively demanding it be a certain way. It's up to us. How conscious do you want to be? Have a look. Have a look and see what it is you hold on to and what happens to you when you hold on to that. See how you destroy your own freedom through clasping, through attachment. What's it like to let go? People think if they let go, they're going to lose everything. You don't know that. That's a dream. That's a projection. You don't know. Let go and see.
The next question is from a viewer. Someone told me karma is like thoughts sporadically and spontaneously arising to want to do things. Is there any truth to this?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. And see, I don't see thoughts as real. A lot of people do. They see thoughts as real, but I don't. I see silence and I see stillness as real. And these wafty little clouds, calling themselves thoughts, come in like clouds and disappear again. They're not real. What's real is the background. What's real is beingness. What's real is what it's all appearing in. Thoughts aren't real. Why pay too much attention to them? They come and go. Thoughts are just dream. Karma, whatever action we put out there, there's a consequence. That's all. Now, the consequence might be something we want or something we don't want, but there's a consequence for our actions. Whatever we put in, we get back, basically. That's the kind of law of karma. And that's how it is. Whatever you put into life, you get back. Even Jesus said, do unto others as you have others do unto you. Well, that's an understanding of karma in itself.
Can meditation be used to help a seeker overcome an addictive nature to either coffee, social media, food, alcohol, excessive exercise, or working?
The best way to overcome an addiction is to stop the addiction. That might sound simplistic, but that's the true answer. And when a person is willing to stop, they will stop. If they're not willing to stop, nothing can help them. No amount of anything can help them, whether it's meditation or anything else. When you want to stop, you put the effort into stopping, you'll stop. Otherwise, you won't stop. And this is the thing with people who are addicted. If they're willing to stop and they put the effort into stop, they'll stop. Nothing else will stop them. If they're not willing, no way is it going to stop. Willingness is what makes a difference. Meditation allows you to quieten your mind, allows you to see through the mind, so it probably allows you to see what you're actually up to, what the addiction you're involved in is doing, and give you a better understanding of the complexities of that addiction, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. But even if you see it all and you see how detrimental that addiction is to you, if you're not willing to stop, you ain't going to stop. That's not going to happen. It's only the willingness to stop and the willingness to make that happen that works.
Did you ever have any addictions? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Heck yeah, I had every addiction. Yeah, I grew up in a family where my grandparents had a couple of bottles of beer every night before they went to bed while watching television, and I just thought that was normal. My dad had a drink every night. My mum had a drink every night. That was normal. All my relatives were big drinkers. It was normal. I grew up with addiction. I grew up with the gambling addiction as well. My father was very much into the horses and the greyhounds and anything that you could bet on. So I grew up with some major addictions in my life and just in my family, and I just thought it was normal. I didn't know that it was wrong or bad or unhealthy at that stage. As a kid, I just thought it was normal. So needless to say, I took up exactly the same addictions because kids copy their parents. And it wasn't until a lot of years later that I realized this is not serving me. This is not serving anybody. These addictions do not help me heal the wounds of my heart. These addictions destroy the relationships that I've got. They don't help build bridges, they help burn them. And so I had a good look at these addictions. And I think I gave up gambling when I was about 20, 21 completely because it was clear to me, look, if you gamble and you win, someone else loses. That's not fun. That's not the way, that's not beautiful. And as far as alcohol is concerned, wow, I kept that one going for a while and just got to see how destructive it was. What a fool you make of yourself when you've drunk too much. How it actually destroys your ability to think properly. And yeah, it lubricates things, it makes things easier, but the cost is too high. And so I think I was 24 when I started a magazine called Addicts, which, because I was a publisher back then. And this magazine went out to all the rehabilitation centres and all the doctor's surgeries in Western Australia. And I produced this uh, periodical. I think it went out monthly. And it was full of the different types of addictions and the different treatments you could get from it, where and when and what. And at the time, I was still smoking cigarettes as well. And of course, I'm reading all these articles about how cigarettes cause cancer and and I'm publishing the magazine, and I started to feel a bit like a hypocrite because I thought addictions was just about drugs. But it's a lot about a lot of things. It's about a lot of things. And so I got a clear understanding of addictions because I was writing editorial on it each month, and how it affected people, how it destroyed their families, uh, how it was an escape methodology. And that set me up for an interest in addictions. And so I think a few years later, some 10 years later, I trained with the Drug and Alcohol Authority in West Australia as an addictions counsellor because I was interested in it. And so at some point, I felt like a hypocrite because I hadn't tried some of the things that I was actually talking to people about. And so I tried everything once or twice, and I could see clearly that all of these things are very addictive. All the drugs are very addictive. Alcohol is very addictive. Gambling is very addictive. Food is very addictive. All of these things are simply escape mechanisms to take us away from discomfort, usually in the beginning at least. And I was more interested in healing the wounds of my heart than running away from them. And so addictions were ceased. I decided to allow myself to be with what is, rather than find ways to escape through medication or whatever else. But the world that I'd entered, the world of addicts, because I was treating them, showed me the level of suffering that addictions cause, how they destroy families, how they destroy human beings. There's no upside to being an addict, only a downside. You end up becoming a massive liar because you lie to make it work for yourself, to get your product, to get whatever you're addicted to. You become unreliable, you become flaky, you become untrustworthy, and you wreck your health, you wreck your relationships. Not a good idea, a bad idea. The problem with giving up addictions is you have to face the music of what's inside of you. And it's going to probably be pretty unpleasant if you've been an addict for a while and you've done a fair bit of damage. But that's the price. That's the price you have to pay. You have to be willing to feel. And in the willingness to feel our wounding, we heal our wounding. Up to you. You're going to create your reality.
The next question's from a viewer. How do I stop resisting the energy of others going through me?
Okay, so you're sensitive enough to feel the energy of others going through you. And so that means there must be a certain level of openness in you to be able to do that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do that. And some people do put out some pretty heavy, gnarly energy, basically because of the way they think. And you can avoid these people, or you can just make it okay. You see, I'm not into avoidance. I'm into making things okay. I'm into acceptance. I'm into let go. I'm into allowing. If we just hide ourselves from people who are heavy, we'll be hiding from half the world. And we'll become very, very trippy. It's best not to become trippy. It's best to actually allow yourself to feel what's there. And if you take on a load that's made you heavy, clear it later. Clear it later. But I definitely don't promote the idea of separation. If don't avoid anything. Allow the world to pass in you and through you. Be okay with everything. This is the way of the heart.
A Following question is from Craig on Facebook. When you began to live your truth, did you feel the reaction from your world that you were losing your mind? How did you deal with this?
Ah. Yeah, a lot of my friends thought, because I've had different periods of time where different things were happening. The early Satori's occurred in the 80s, and at that time I gave my businesses up in search of heart. And I was relatively wealthy and successful as a young man, and all of my friends and my family thought I was going completely nuts. They didn't understand that I'd found the jewel of consciousness. I'd found heart, and that I was going to pursue it. They just couldn't get it. So they thought I was going crazy. One of them, a good friend of mine, offered me hundreds of thousands of dollars to save my business. My business wasn't in trouble. I actually gave it to my staff. I didn't want to know about it anymore. But that's how concerned they were with my sanity. They tried to save me. And that was in the 80s. And then again in the late 90s, when awakening started occurring, everyone got quite concerned because I just wanted to sit still all day and do nothing because I was profoundly content for no reason. And they didn't understand. They couldn't understand. It didn't fit into their reference points. Someone awakening in the West is so unusual. Nobody has any reference points for it. They don't know what to do. They think something's wrong with you. The greatest thing in the world is happening. Enlightenment is happening, but they haven't got a clue what's happening. And so they try to protect you. They try to take care of you. They try to disturb you. And it's this point, particularly in the West, for myself, I had to stand alone in surrender because there was no support for what was happening whatsoever. But I knew. Awareness had turned on to itself. My mind started to go silent. It knew.
The next question is from a viewer. You said addictions were stronger energy forms. Is strong energy bad?
Well, I didn't say addictions were stronger energy forms. I said you can put stronger energy into an addiction or less, or stronger energy into a preference. And so we look at desires. We can have a strong desire or we can have a preference. And it depends on how much energy we put into that as to how much we suffer. Uh, Becoming an addiction is usually just a thirst for something that we've uh, we've grown very used to, and the thirst is strong, so we keep repeating it. Um, but we can change that if we want. We can let it go. It just means we'll probably have some pain for a while we let it go because the mind is used to having it. But let go itself, if we're truly in let go, if we're truly in acceptance, the game is up. Acceptance is brilliant. It's just that a lot of the time we're not very good at it because it's not something human beings practice. They practice resistance. They practice conditional acceptance, which is not acceptance. True acceptance is the end of the story. It's over. It's brilliant. Try it.
Is it possible to become addicted to something after awakening?
I don't know. An addiction would be a thirst for something, a desire for something. It would mean there's some form of discontentment when you're not getting that product or whatever it is, substance or whatever it is. awakening, one of the conditions of awakening, or one of the symptoms of awakening, that's better, from the mind's perspective, is profound contentment for no reason. This is what I call true happiness, profound contentment for no reason. But in profound contentment for no reason, there's no addictions. You're free. And so the question, can you become addicted to something after awakening? I don't think so. But I don't know. It's not my experience. Profound contentment for no reason is the experience here.
Did your longing for truth or heart ever cause you to suffer?
Heck yeah. Yeah, as a seeker, I had found truth. I'd had satori's, and the longing for it was so great that yeah, I suffered. And then the longing for heart after heart awoke in the first place and not having it, there was suffering because I was longing for it and I was desiring it and I was wanting it. Of course, that's suffering. Um, the thirst for truth, the thirst to be free is suffering. But that's the only thirst, the only desire that's actually worth having, because that's the only desire that can bring you home. Without that desire to be free, without that thirst for truth, you won't do what you need to do to get out of the way. You won't do what you need to do to support enlightenment. And so that one's worth keeping until you're awake, and then it goes. Just before awakening, everything goes anyway, even the desire to wake up.
I've heard a well-known saying about the Buddhist path. It is best not to start. Once begun, it is best to finish. Is this your understanding of the seeker's journey?
Yeah, it is. You see, if you start and you quit halfway through, you know too much, and as a result, you'll be very dissatisfied with life. It's best once you start that you finish the trip. You put your totality in and you finish the trip. If you have put a lot of effort in and haven't got home, if you've put a lot of effort in and you quit, you've probably seen a great deal and you'll never be discontent with anything less. You'll never be happy with anything less. That's a better way of putting it. You'll always be discontent. It's always best if you start the path to finish it.
Is it possible to be addicted to the Buddha field of an awakened being? And is there a risk of becoming too dependent on the teacher?
The addiction to the Buddha field is an addiction to your own true nature. A Buddha field is produced by awareness being aware of itself in a human being. If you become addicted to that, you're becoming addicted to the energy field of beingness. And as a result of that addiction, you'll probably do anything you can to find that in yourself. That encourages the thirst for a freedom, the thirst for enlightenment. That is not a bad addiction. I recall clearly I had that addiction. I was absolutely, categorically addicted to the Buddha field of my teachers. I would tune into them anytime I could. And I'd be with my teachers anytime I could because of that Buddha field. And what happened as a result of my mind's love affair with that Buddha field is that Buddha field started finding me. Truth started finding me. I started finding that space when my teachers weren't around, when I wasn't in Satsang. So, tune in. As far as becoming addicted or dependent on a teacher, if you're lost in the jungle and you've got a guide who's taking you out and you do not know the way out, you are dependent on that guide. And the same goes for enlightenment. It's really difficult to wake up by yourself. The ego is a survival mechanism. It will do anything to survive. If you're with someone who's awake, they'll help you out of that jungle too. It's up to you. I had teachers the whole way through. I had Osho Rajneesh for 8 years until he died. And then the Advaita Vedanta people came and I had them. And I followed instruction to the letter. I didn't arrogantly think that somehow I knew better. How can you know better than somebody who's further ahead than you? If you follow instructions of those who are awake, you'll get free. And if you really look at those instructions, you'll discover that they're not original anyway. They've been taught for 10,000 years or more. But if you follow them, you have a chance. If you decide to do it your way, you'll probably miss the boat. Your choice. A teacher, to be with someone who's awake is a gift. To be able to have access to someone who's awake is access to the door into your own consciousness, access to freedom. It's brilliant. It's up to you, though. You sit in the presence of someone who's awake, your mind will expand and start to disappear, puts you in exactly the right place for knowing yourself as truth. It's up to you, though. You're the one that's going to put yourself there or not. You're the one that's going to be attracted or not. I was very attracted to the awakened ones. I could feel their field of energy. I could feel it so strongly that if they came to Perth and they landed at the airport, I could feel them landing. Because it's a frequency. You can tune into it. My mind would start expanding. It would start disappearing. And in that space, we start to have the benefit of awareness turning onto itself and discovering itself. Up to you. How thirsty are you for truth? How thirsty are you to wake up? I think the greatest mistake that seekers make is they think that just sitting in the Buddha field's enough. No. Sitting in the Buddha field creates the right ground. But if you're not prepared to do what it takes, if you're not prepared to prepare the mind for enlightenment, well, it's probably not going to happen. Openness counts for everything. Take down your defense systems. Become present to reality through meditation. Self-inquire. These things work. Thank you for Satsang. Good to see you brave hearts here today.